I'd like to welcome everyone to our meeting tonight. I'd like to excuse Commissioner Mason, Chairman Thomas, and Commissioner Nancaro from our meeting tonight. We'll have an invocation of thought by Commissioner Green and the Pledge of Allegiance by Commissioner Barker.
Okay, so for tonight, I'm actually going to share a thought or thoughts real quick with the Planning Commission. We're small in number, but I think this could be helpful for us. This is the 7 norms of collaboration. The first one is promoting a spirit of inquiry. This idea that we want to say to each other, tell me more about that, or what are you thinking? Number 2, pausing. Just taking a quick moment to get our thoughts together so that we can make sure all of us are able to share what we're thinking or the people speaking to us. Number 3, paraphrasing, the ability to restate what the person said to just confirm that we have it correct. Again, people, citizens approaching us and speaking. Number 4, probing for specificity. So essentially like, what makes you say that? Or is this what you mean? Or tell me more about that. Number 5, putting ideas on the table. For those of us who are a little more on the shy side, sometimes that can be a challenge, but the ability to speak our minds and not be afraid to say what we would like. Number 6, paying attention to self and others. Sometimes we're giving off body language or our comments might not be as open and willing to receive feedback as we would prefer. And finally, number 7, presuming positive intentions, which I think is a great one anytime we're trying to collaborate or work with the public, is that we're all here for the right reasons and we should assume that it's positive. Okay, there we go.
Rise. Repeat the Pledge of Allegiance after me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Green and Commissioner Barker. All right, do we have any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest to disclose here? All right, looks like there are none. Are there any public comments for items that are not on the agenda for tonight? Great, so we'll move to our legislative items. The first legislative item is the annexation of 2023-03, which is the consideration of action on legislative application to annex property at approximately 730 East, 1750 North, and zone the property R18 AG. And the presenter is Ryan Nunn, our planner.
Thank you. So yeah, this property, a couple of the points I wanted to make from it is that it was the legislative decision. So we'll be just making a recommendation. It was recently purchased by the owner, so that's why if you look at it, it's just a small parcel, and so they just recently purchased it and are looking to just bring it into the city boundaries. And we recommend this because it meets one of our general plan priorities of bringing some of these kind of county islands that are just surrounded by our city boundaries into the city.
Great, thank you.
It's worth noting the applicant couldn't be here tonight. It's his birthday. And he said he would have loved to spend it with us, but decided to do dinner instead of his family. So we don't have an applicant representative, but the applicant had requested an agricultural zone. I think A1 is what, or RE20 was what had come in on the annexation application. Annexation being a 2-part process where it begins at the city council and then is pushed back to planning commission for us to consider general plan, the zoning, and make a recommendation for whether or not we should bring this in and apply a zoning to it. The surrounding areas were brought in under R18 AG, which substantively is similar to RE20. It preserves the animal rights that the applicant would like to do on the property, and this combined with the other parcels that Mr. Mackley owns would preserve any and all large animal rights that they want to do there for grazing or.
Is it Paul that owns it? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so we open it for public comment. We'd like to open it for public comment. Is there anyone online?
There's not.
All right, we'll close the public comment section for this item and open it up for discussion amongst the commission and the recommendation.
Seems like this is kind of a no-brainer deal. Pretty straightforward to annex it into the city. R1A Act, reading it through the whole staff, it fits the area better than Marine Twin.
Yeah.
Being able to execute, you can have his forces.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, I see nothing here that to argue about, honestly.
No heartburn.
Yeah,
Does anyone
no
want to make
heartburn.
a motion?
Sure. I recommend that we, well, I guess we recommend that we annex the property at approximately 730 East, 1750 North, and rezone the property R18. AG.
Oh, that's right. And it's just like a friendly amendment to that from staff is the recommendation is to the city council, recommendation from planning commission that the property be annexed at R18AG.
Okay.
And that be forwarded
So it's
as a
in-
positive recommendation to council.
Gotcha, so it's good to include that text. So let me try again. So I recommend to city council that we annex, correct, is that the tag we need? Annex the property at approximately 730 East, 1750 North, and zone the property R18 AG.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Commissioner Watson, how do you vote?
Yay.
Commissioner Green?
Yes.
Commissioner Barker?
Yes.
And I guess we'd like to welcome Chairman Thomas, and can you vote on this thing? Or
Yes.
wait? Okay, I'll positive vote. Okay, and I vote yes as well, so motion passes. All right, let's move on to legislative item number 5 here, which is zoning text amendment 2023-08, which is a public hearing and consideration and recommendation on a legislative amendment to amend accessory building standards citywide. The presenter is Scott Hess, our Community and Economic Development Director.
Thank you. Thank you, planning commission members. I wrote a very short staff report on this one. We've gone through this process. We've done the full citywide, full residential areas, accessory building standards amendments. What I wanted to do, if possible, and I don't want to slow the applicant down, but I also just want to think through this, is maybe use this time for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or something, or whatever it takes. I mean, I don't care. It's just, we can spend longer than that, but let's have a thorough discussion about this and provide some guidance to staff. So one, with some questions being, one, do we create a carve out or an exemption for properties that are adjacent to properties that may have limited development potential? I think in the last meeting when Mr. Wallace came and made public comments, Chair Thomas, you mentioned on a long enough horizon, anything can be, anywhere can be almost anything, right? And so that's one of those things, you make a decision with the best information you have today, and that might be a 10, 20, or 30-year decision, but down the road, that could be unwound, and then we're creating a legal non-conforming use at that time, should Bonavista ever redevelop as something else. And that's unlikely, but not impossible. I did another look today, and really accessory building standards are all over the place. I mean, some cities allow full height at 6 feet away from the property line, and all they do is they just do fire protection on structures, which is a minimum amount of distance between structures, basically. So it's totally up to what you want as your community. The last effort in this being, as buildings get taller, they march further away from the property line in an attempt to preserve some sight lines. But that doesn't stop somebody from planting a row of 40-foot tall pine trees or cottonwoods or something right on their property line, kind of negating our efforts with accessory buildings. So you're really weighing and balancing everybody's different property rights here. But if I'd like to let the applicant speak again, but use this as a time to workshop it, because I don't have a strong rezone text amendment recommendation for you. I don't have an ordinance language in front of you. I'd like to just get some thoughts and gather those and then come back in 2 weeks, and we'll have something I think a little bit more concrete, or have had an opportunity beyond just the comment at the public hearing or public comments to really talk through it. So I don't know if that's a really weak suggestion, but it was the best I could come up with in the time. And it at least begins the applicant's journey of moving through this process. Mr. Wallace, just for your, just so you know, the step that we're in with the planning commission is a recommendation to the city council. So as the applicant, and we've had this happen, you can call the question basically at any point. So you can run through this process and you could say, I have proposed language, and it might not be the right language, but I want to advance forward to the city council step. That's at your discretion. So you could ask the council, call the question, yes, no, indifferent on what I've proposed, or could you write language for me tonight to do this? And the planning commission, upon that request, will have a no vote, a yes vote, or somewhere in between, right? Of recommendation to the council, moving you forward, and then you could have the whole debate at the council. And it's really neither here nor there. Sometimes that's beneficial. Sometimes, the council members might have an idea of how they want an ordinance crafted. And so crafting at a planning commission may or may not be in your best interest, but we have a really good planning commission that, thinks about the city and loves the city and wants to see the best by it. So my recommendation was just to workshop it a little bit, and then we'll bring back an ordinance. And if we're, if you feel like we're being too slow or dragging feet or this isn't working for you, I just want to make sure as the applicant, you're in the driver's seat. So with that, I'll ask for any comments you have on my presentation, and then we also have Bob Walls, the applicant, here. And it is a proper public hearing. We'll need to open and close in that terms.
Okay, so we'd like to open the public hearing for public comment on this.
We need. Yep, you opened the public hearing. Okay.
Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this?
Nope.
Step forward and tell us who you are and you live here or where you live.
Merrill Sunderland, North Ogden City. I just have a question. I'm fairly certain this isn't the first time this particular issue has come before the city council. And here it is in the planning commission. Is this my question, is this a specific request by a person that is driving or expanding to determine policy for all these types of buildings? That's my question.
Would you like to reference it to anyone in particular or just anyone here in this room?
Would you please answer?
I can answer that.
Oh,
that'd be
dude.
Yeah. So zoning text amendments come in many forms. Sometimes the council will have a directive to staff asking them to consider an issue and bring it back. Land use ordinance changes always go planning commission recommendation, city council action. That's the way the legislative action process works. In this particular case, we had an applicant pay the fee to bring forward a rezoning text amendment based on a structure on his property that is taller than allowed based on the setback in the zone. So the request being, can we amend the zoning text to permit buildings of a certain height and a certain distance away from the property line that makes a building conform. So as any resident can pay their $350 and bring an issue forward to the planning commission and the council, but that doesn't stop other, mayor and council has directed staff to review these issues before as well. So they come in many forms. In this particular case, it's an applicant-driven request.
That will potentially change I'm trying to think of the correct term for what they're changing.
Accessory building standards.
Standard. I certainly understand now and see why it is quite important, as Mr. Hess mentioned, to have as serious as possible discussion on this and try to look at the implications. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other public comment?
Chris Pulver, North Ogden. Just thinking in my mind, because I'm in the same thing, putting up a shed that's, 10 feet high, or I think a little bit less, 3 feet away from property line. It depends, because if you saw where my shed was and where Mr. D's wall was, it's kind of hilarious because his wall is higher than my shed. So, you know, in reality, you know, the whole point of a setback is, you stated, sightline. It's nothing to do with anything else. Sure, might be fire protection, et cetera, but to me, in my mind, it's, once again, aesthetics, which I hate putting in ordinances, but if it's not safety related, then it's aesthetics. So, in my mind, I think there should be something in there that says, you know, if something is not, if you're not covering up somebody's sight line or something in that effect, then yeah, I mean, because as you build up, and this is gonna come up, you know, in any zone in reality, because as you go up a hill, you know, that affects things differently. You know, because if like you're below a ginormous wall, does it really matter that your 11-foot 6-inch accessory building is 2 feet from your property line? No, because it doesn't affect anybody's sight line. Anyway, just a thought. Thanks.
Thanks for your comment. Any other comments? And we'll close the public hearing and open it up
We need
to.
we need a motion.
Oh, excuse me.
We close the public hearing.
Thank you. We need a second for that. We have a motion and a second. We'll close the public hearing.
We need an all
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
This
Commissioner.
is trial by fire, sorry.
That's all right.
I don't mean to stare at you.
No, no. It's great.
This is fun for you. You love it.
Sure. No, I hate this. So we open it up to discussion for.
This is, you can discuss, you can bring the applicant up, it's, at this point, your.
I think we'd like to invite the applicant up if you have any comments.
Thank you. I'm Bob Wallace. Appreciate you taking the time to listen to my case. And I showed up here 2 weeks ago, just unannounced, you know, just to kind of give you a heads up as to what my situation is. And again, you know, hindsight is 20/20. But if I would have, you know, done it the right way, I wouldn't be here right now. We would have set it back where it should have been, and it wouldn't have been an issue. That being said, and I think you made the suggestion about talking to Buena Vista about, you know, working out something with some property lines and some easements. I met with them, and they've been great neighbors. And we've always gotten along real well, and they would have been happy to work something out if they were not in the process of planning on building another tank on that property, right exactly across the fence from where I am. So that's why they kind of even wanted to approach me about buying some of my property, which is impossible. So that being said, they are willing, because I know the concern came up that, well, 30 years from now, who knows, for 50 years, somebody, you know, that those tanks might not be there. I watched that 33 million gallon tank being built. I would sure hate to have to remove that, a lot of concrete steel in that thing. And when I made that comment to them, they just laughed. They said, "Oh, we're not going anywhere." And they said, we would be happy to provide the city with a letter stating 2 things. one, they have no problem with the height of my outbuilding. And 2, that will never, as long as Buena Vista exists, be a residential property, which would, you know, and even if it was, my question to you would be, if this was approved and that structure was existing, if a developer in the future came in to develop something there, what are they gonna do? I mean, it's not like they couldn't develop it, and if somebody wanted to buy the property and build a house on it, then they would be fully aware of what's on the other side of the fence, and I doubt if it would make any difference to them. And the way the topography is anyway, you know, it's an 11% slope hill. I mean, it just keeps going up higher and higher, so I don't block really anybody's view. So, I failed on getting the simple solution, which would have been to change that that property line, then I guess it would have been a moot point. But even to that effect, had they allowed me to buy that 5 feet or just, give it to me, all it would be a line on a map. It really doesn't change anything. Nothing would really change, other than I realize, we live in the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, and sadly, sometimes the letter of the law is what rules the day, and sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I understand the position that you're all in. So anyway, I guess I just throw myself self-prostrate on the court and, hope for the best. But I've spent a lot of money. I've and to change the structure, to make it be in compliance, it would be very expensive to do that, and I don't want to do it. I mean, obviously, I think y'all can see that. And it's not a bad looking, I think it enhances the neighborhood. I actually would block the view of an ugly water tank. Look at it that way. Anyway, that's really all I have to say. So, and I really wish that there wouldn't be something where we would have to change the code that affects everybody. I mean, I don't want to change it for, Scott referred to the pendulum swinging back and forth, and it has. I looked at the history of those codes for those setbacks and heights of buildings and such, and it's kind of all over the place. So I don't really want to have to change it for everybody, but under this circumstance, it's kind of a unique situation because really there's never going to be a development on the other side of that fence. And so if somebody else came here 5 years from now and said they wanted to do the same thing, if they had the same conditions, then good, go for it. I mean, I don't think it shouldn't be that big of a deal, but anyway, I guess that's all I've got to say.
Okay, thanks for your comments. Thank you.
To answer Bob's question.
Yeah.
Is that it's in my opinion, bad form to create ordinances that have a who came first provision in them. And we actually still have a few of those. Your swimming pools, for instance, need to be 35 feet away from an adjacent dwelling, your pool and your pool equipment. And I can tell you 100% there are houses that have been approved that are closer than 35 feet to their neighbor's pool, because we're not going to stop a building permit for a house, and that pool was legal when it was built. So
That's because the rule is a pool has to be that far from a building.
Yeah.
But the building doesn't have to be that far from the pool.
ooh, zing. Okay, build all your pools first. But it's just one of those, it's bad practice to have one that relies on another, because if the rules change, if the zoning flips, then you create legal non-conforming uses, which then, if you want to play really strict letter of the law, Bob comes in 10 years after the fact and now wants to expand his garage by 2 feet. He can't, because you can't expand a legal non-conforming use. So maybe under the current approach that the applicant has taken, the planning commission could workshop or think about what are the uses that something like this could be adjacent to that would like half the distance and height requirement, so you get like a 50% distance requirement. And would it be special service districts? Is it service providers? Is it civic uses? Is it, do you want to go use and not zoning? Like literally say water districts or detention basins. Detention basins are scary because we're seeing those already in Weber County turn over into housing. South Ogden has done this already. Manufacturing uses, like you could think about what are those uses that would be not obnoxious or have concerns against having a taller building closer to the property line. And then you kind of have a known quantity in the city of the number of people who might even come and request this.
So my opinion on this is you can't make an ordinance that says nothing will ever go on the neighboring ground, so that's okay here. However, would we be able to rezone Buena Vista's ground to a civic zone? John or Scott, with that, because they are a public utility?
Yeah, if they would, we could rezone them to a civic zone.
So my thoughts, I've got three different suggestions. One is if we were to allow it and say, you know, you can use building height, just 10 feet from property line can be max building height against a property line that is adjacent to a civic zone. That becomes city property, schools, parks, things like that, that, you know, it's not a dwelling that we're saying, hey, that we're worried about a view shed or something like that. The other suggestion, I gotta go to whiteboard. So what I talked about a little bit, if a property line, if this is the property line and the roof line of that building is like this, that distance measurement would be from the peak of the building to the property line. So if this point was 10 feet, and that means it's 10 feet away from the property line, then his roof pitch, if it's taller than that, has to meet that 1-to-1 slope. To meet whatever this height is here, still has to meet that measurement we have in the ordinance now. Now, that would only work if the building is parallel to the property line and the roof does that. You couldn't do it and have a gable, you know, on this end of the building and have it go this way, because that peak is within 10 feet. Because the object of the zone or the ordinance is that view shed. Well, why does it matter if you can have a straight wall 15 feet away from the property and then have your building do this and have this be 15 feet tall or whatever that is? So then you gotta be 15 feet away, but 15 foot tall right here is still 15 feet away. And the edge of the building is it meets that 10-foot height requirement. So that is one solution that I look at, but the other is, let's say that measurement of that property line, that 10-foot, whatever the height of the building is relative to what the elevation of the property line is. So if the property line is, you know, let me see how we draw that. The property line's right here and the bottom of the building is right here, like that. So this is where you take that measurement from to the top of the building, not, you know, the building's 10 feet away from the property line or whatever. You wouldn't say, oh, hey, the plans from that building says it's 18 feet tall. Well, what is it from that property line? Yeah. Good way to explain.
Elevation change.
You know, something like that, because also somebody could say, well, I'm gonna build that building and I'm gonna bury this back 4 feet. So it's level behind my property to the property line and it's buried right there. So why does that matter? Because I know, I'm sure in the application process, you look at the plans on a building and it just shows how tall the building is. It's in a perfect scenario as though the whole world is flat. Well, we only got a third of the city that's flat. And so
And I'll tell you just.
have something more relative to that, again, for the same purpose of, are we protecting a view shed?
And currently, we measure buildings this way in two different ways, and it depends on, Nate Davis, our building official, and I have agreed on it, depends on where you enter the building, the main place. So if this is a garage, if the garage door were right here, and this ground went down, flat, down, we would measure the building at this height, right
So is it possible to rewrite the ordinance to build that elevation change?
there. Yeah, it'll be fun. The other one is, say the garage door is on this side, right? It's facing out that way. We measure the entire height of the building to the finished floor elevation where you enter coming in. And we have several of these in North Ogden where from the front, it's like a 25-foot tall house, right? But the back of the garage almost touches the dirt because the lot is so steep. So we don't need, at times we'll measure the average, at times we'll measure the total height, but this is your first suggestion. We did talk about in that first meeting of, you know, you've got a 10-foot tall wall height here, and then that 1-to-1, can all of this be building area? You know, up to that maximum height, and we decided no. But if you were to turn your building, view shed wise, it does do the exact same thing. You're seeing up over that peak. So we'd have to have diagrams of like where your gable end is on your.
So, I mean, just the same reason, like the way you're measuring this, the whole reason we have limitations on building height, this just hurts everybody for the point of, hey, I want to have a 25-foot tall building so I can put my RV in it, and I'm gonna bury it in the back of the hillside. Well, then it's only high facing the street, and so what does that matter? So, those are my three suggestions of saying the civic zone, the way we measure that height to determine the setback is off the actual elevation of the property line and to the building height. Because it does, unfortunately, all our zones, all code does relate to who came first. We have it in there so somebody doesn't build a building and block their neighbor's view. If a building's already there and a neighbor wants to come and buy the property and build something, well, they know what's already there.
Yeah.
And so that, we check that box anyway, but we can't make an ordinance say, well, whoever builds first, you get to decide how high. We still want to have governance.
Right.
Well, that's
Right.
happened in several.
And so, yeah, because especially when it's, well, somebody goes and builds, like if I build a shed behind my house in a brand new subdivision, they're like, well, I'm first, I get to do whatever I want. That's really not the intent, but this unique situation, again, if our ordinance is left the same and we simply make an adjustment saying if it abuts civic zone property, I think that's a global answer that solves all of the problems. But I also think as we look at hillside building and all those things, our point of measurement and building height should really reflect what the intent of the zone is from the property line.
Like both those ideas, we gotta make common sense.
Hey, we can't make rules about that.
And it would seem
Government can't
like,
have common
Gotta go
sense.
back Common sense, right?
would it seem like your second option, the one there in red, might be a little easier for us to capture, for the city to implement measurement of?
Yeah,
That's just one thought I'm having.
yeah, we would need, for new homes, it's really easy to require a new home builder to give us elevations because they've had a survey done, it's a brand new building lot, and they'll go out and they can shoot those elevations and they're giving us a grading plan. But I'm thinking through asking,
Well, but no matter what goes, if it's gonna exceed the building height, it's probably big enough it's requiring a permit.
yes, it is, but what you're asking a private property owner to do, who's probably maximizing their financial input into just the building itself, to go spend several $100s or more to get a surveyor to come out and shoot an elevation.
Right.
Yeah.
But I can see both, and both would provide it depends on the property, like both would provide a different benefit to either, but we could really easily amend the ordinance to say gable ends that are, straight at the property line, just get maximum height of the peak, gable ends that are turned so the roof is under the 1-to-1 slope, get the wall height at whatever distance. And that in this particular case would solve the issue. His roof pitch is about a 412 pitch. So it's much lower as it marches away from the property line than it could be the slope is less than it could be under that situation.
So I guess just for me, I'm personally favoring either option 2 for the sake of implementation, being a little more reasonable, or the civic zone idea. Can you articulated before, like so schools, that comes to mind for me. Like, I'm just thinking, are we saying the 25 feet is what we would then allow if it borders the civic zone? Is that what we're?
Well, I think it goes back to what's the intent of the ordinance.
Right,
Like if we're all thinking, well, it's to protect the view of the neighbor,
right.
then we're saying we don't need to protect a civic zone.
Yeah, I think that makes
Then
sense.
it doesn't matter. It can be the height at 10 feet. But you might start creating, I mean, in that instance, you're gonna have the peak of a building could be 10 feet away and be 25 feet tall, which if it's against that civic zone, who cares?
Right.
If that's how we feel.
That's the only thing I wanted to just puzzle out. Is there anything we're missing there? Like, I'm thinking at my school, having a building 25 feet bordering our property, does that cause me problems? I don't
Well, flip
think
it around.
so.
If we're in the civic zone, does this same building height regulation apply?
Well, true,
So the city can go build a shed 25 feet tall, 10 feet away from their property line,
true.
over here on Longview.
You could build a structure. I think I can tell you what the setbacks are.
So I guess what I'm saying is, it's not like, well, if they can do it, we can do it, but it's like, the intent isn't really to protect the view.
Yeah,
Against that.
absolutely, absolutely.
So my resistance to changing any ordinance is, how does it affect the people that have already done that particular thing under the ordinance by the rules? And, I guess what I'm asking here is, or what I'm saying is, we're offending less people, right? If we move it to a civic ordinance, then less people are like, hey, well, what happened when I wanted to do that, right? And also, does it give now anybody with the border of a civic the opportunity to build whatever we decide on, right? As kind of a benefit to living next to a school? I don't know. Those are just questions I'm 100% open to the answers to.
I kind of like the idea of the civic zone too, because they're water storage reservoirs developed by a public agency are specifically called out as a permitted use in the civic zone. So while it solves one issue, it also doesn't, it matches what the city would do in grabbing Bonavista's property and rezoning it today. That we could do that with, we could do a mass rezone of all of these types of uses across the city, which we need to be doing kind of anyways, at least those that don't require a site plan, and mass rezone it. But I can see both. I mean, you're right, Cody, like, that you're picking winners and losers every time you do these zoning text amendments. So, there are people who spend all their money building a 15-foot tall accessory building in the HP 1, 2, and 3 zones. And then we changed the rules and allowed them to come into line with everything else. And so, there's probably some short accessory buildings in the cove that they would have loved to wait a year or 2 years and get the new regulation. And it just, or, people who clad their buildings in hardy board that now you could get a metal building again. Like the rules change. So,
Okay.
but
But it
I
is-
like being sensitive to that. It's really good.
But this ordinance is new enough that it's like that. It was like I guess you could chalk it up to, it was a reaction of created ordinance that maybe was created. It's still in that learning stage of what things did we mess up by making it this restrictive? When we made it the original size, and then we came back and says, hey, well, let's make some allowances for higher buildings. Because at first, I remember when it was like, what was it? You weren't here, Steve. 14 feet was the max. And I sat there in all the meetings and said, people want to build sheds to be able to put their RVs in, and they need a 12-foot garage door. You can't fit that in a 14-foot tall building. But yeah, they still said, well, yeah, let's make that the max. And it's like, well, now we just screwed up everything. And so then we come back and, hey, let's make them taller with these rules. And so again, it's going back to what is the intent?
Right.
And so the same thing, we went, who was here, that we toured the city and looked at all the accessory buildings
It was Scott and
and
Brandon or Rob, I mean.
Rob, and so, but back then, and it was like, and we come across the tall garage that was, the back of it was buried into the ground, and we're like, well, that's fine, that's not a big deal.
Right.
And then all of a sudden on flat ground, when that tall right by the property line was a big deal. And so it's like, how do you accommodate
Yeah.
everything?
And you speaking to that, I guess when you said, you feel like there was some reactionary things that might be corrected. I guess I just wanted to point out that I wish this had come before us for maybe a different reason, in the sense that I do worry about us being reactionary right now to fix this situation. And I guess I just want to say, I wish the applicant had obviously just followed the rules that all of us have played by. So that's one reason.
So do you.
I'm sorry, sir, I'm sorry. But that's one reason.
I admitted that.
That's one reason why I like your point of keeping the point in mind, which is what's the purpose that the ordinance was there in the first place. And if we're changing anything, it should be because we feel like it fulfills a purpose better, not so much the individual applicant's specific
Pretend like
needs.
I didn't even exist. This
Right,
didn't happen,
exactly.
It's just idea
And
came
so-
to your mind.
Yeah, and so that's why I like your option you drew on the board, in the sense that it preserves the
Yeah, I would
intention.
agree that the intent was view shed in that,
Mhm.
then measuring at the peak,
Right.
allowing for that 1-to-1 to be above the 10 feet of the building and still that building over, meets the intent of what the ordinance was created for. Making it say if you're against the civic zone, then at the height, you don't have to follow this rule. That, I agree, is more reactionary. It doesn't harm anybody, but again, going back to that intent, neither does taking that measurement on the slope of the roof. Because, or, I mean, going clear back to when the guy couldn't build his accessory building across from Northern Ice. His yard is like 8 feet below the road. And he wanted to be able to put that building there, and it's like, well, you can't, you're too tall, you have to be this far away from property line. And that's like, so his building's here and the road's over here, and there's this great big valley of yard between the two. And, you know, and so it's like, there's always an instance that doesn't, our ordinance isn't gonna fit, and so, but, I mean, I wouldn't even oppose to making both changes of saying, hey, civic and, you know, my diagram in the red, if you're going to the roof line.
Yeah.
Or the property line. I mean, I would add all three of them myself, saying, hey, again, if it's a view shed, then measure from the property line what that height is, because the negative of that is, what if it's in reverse? What if your property line's 6 feet below your 10-foot in mark and you want to build this building? Again, if it's intent. Now you've got a building that's 10 feet tall, 10 feet away from the property line, but it's really 16 feet above the property line elevation. It's blocking, so.
Isn't the height of the property line pretty arbitrary? I mean, can't we adjust that?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Somebody could fill
I've heard
the,
there's
fill the
tractors
lot.
and stuff.
Yeah,
Guys that do that for a living.
yeah.
Well, that goes
And I'm
to
not
the,
trying to be a smart aleck here. I'm
No,
really,
but
that's a
it's really
genuine
just-
question on those two drawings there.
Because the
I
same,
look
if
at
you're
that.
gonna bury half the building 4 feet in the ground to match level with the property line or whatever. I mean, so if you go back, you remember one of the options on a retaining wall height adjustment was, we'll just bury the bottom 4 feet. with
Right.
dirt, and then all of a sudden it's only this tall.
Right.
And there's a big hump of dirt at the bottom.
Right.
Really? Like,
Yeah, I know.
yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah.
We wasn't just all flat earthers.
Yeah, so, John, you were gonna say something?
well, I was gonna say that, you know, that comment was, that's the retaining wall, right? Because that property line dirt got changed. It got raised by 10 feet. So in theory, with this proposal, you could have a 20-foot building and the uphill neighbor isn't gonna have an impact. The downhill neighbor might have an impact.
Yes, and side to side.
And, but you're never gonna find a perfect solution for everything. And that was the point of that tour we went on. And I know several of you, well, at least 2 of you were there, that it was, we just walked, the consensus from that tour was, if it looks good, then it's okay. If it's ugly, it's not okay.
Yeah,
Honestly.
that's so
That's-
true.
that's what it was.
Uh-huh.
I mean, in the spirit of arbitrary lines drawn, what's to stop him from putting 6 feet of dirt on the side of this building other than obviously the foundation? But
For his particular building, it's,
I'm not offering that as a solution. To be very clear.
So I'll give you the property line fence is right here. And
Shoot,
his
you need
entire,
the colors.
his
Use a
entire,
darker color. I picked that.
I know I can't see, but
so
this is,
his entire lot basically goes like this. And it actually goes kind of more like this. So his building straddles right there, and there's a retaining wall. So when we were on site, really pretty building, I think these are reversed. I think this comes up and then it's like that, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I know how things are done. And then over here, so this is a garage. And this is the approximately, just call it 10 feet, I think it's like 9.5 to his property line. So when Nate Davis and I went out on site to check this building, we made a call, we drew an arbitrary line right there. Not an arbitrary, we averaged this height, and we measured his building right here. So that gave us the height of 19 foot 6 inches, something like that, it's 20 feet tall. So it needs to be, well, actually, I think it's like 25 feet tall, because it needs to be 15 feet from the property line. And so he needs to either buy 5 feet, which would be to his point, you know, the fence isn't gonna move and Bonavista's property keeps marching uphill, that this would be kind of arbitrary. But this is a perfect example of a building in the field where it wasn't exactly clear where to measure this building from. So we did like a tie goes to the runner. We measured the average height across the two slopes. We subtracted and we made a judgment call on this so that we could get this as close to like right as possible. The other problem being if you go from the very, very peak of the building all the way down to the very, very bottom, he exceeds the maximum height of the building. But in other buildings like this, where you have a hillside, that happens sometimes. One side of the building just kind of drops off the hill. So it was a judgment call, basically, in how it was measured. And this one might work in Eric's case. I worry about the reverse, Eric, of the, what happens if the uphill height neighbor, do they still get their maximum height building at their setback? Because they're kind of like doubling down on their view impacts.
Yeah, that's the negative side is the opposite of saying, well, you're, I mean,
You can put in a retaining wall and then a 25-foot building and.
Yeah, but like how tall could Brad D, I mean, not a property owner up there, how tall could that building be? Would you measure it height wise from his flat backyard on top of his 11-foot tall retaining wall? If the retaining wall's on property line?
All of a sudden you're in a shadow.
And, you know, then Chris's shed that's trumped by the retaining wall is all of a sudden underneath a 25-foot tall.
but if you're looking at it that myopically, his yard at 11 feet in is too high.
True. Yeah, at 11, his yard is.
His yard's 11 feet tall and it can only be 10 feet above property line, 10 feet in.
It's true.
So,
And well, and that was part of the reason that the retaining wall ordinance was set where it was to force you to step it back.
But it's that, if we're looking at a view shed, I mean, the uphill guy, again, under the rule of my red drawing over there saying your peak has to meet that same, our measurements in the ordinance don't change.
No,
It's
just.
We're taking a measurement from property line to the peak, or if it's the building height, you say, hey, the building says it's 25 feet tall, you determine the building is, so it has to be 15 feet. Well, you could be 10 feet at 10 feet, and then the building can't exceed that 1-to-1 on the roof line. So, and if they want to say, well, the uphill guy, it's still the same, like, we're not taking advantage. The one at Berrien and Hillside, we take advantage if the downhill guy gets hurt, but if we're looking at a view shed, it's still, nothing changes from that scenario.
And that's easy, that's easy to draw. So you draw one where it's the full building underneath the 1-to-1, and then the other if you turn the building. So that's, from just an administration standpoint, that one's not that difficult. And somebody could then gable their roof, or they could drop the back pitch of their roof, so you'd have a 3-side.
Give somebody an option, say, hey, I want this tall building, but I don't want it in the middle of my backyard. Well, here's a way you can do it without buying the property next to you, giving it to the church and rezoning it to civic.
Well,
Or school.
no, it's options 2 and 3 give people more options, you know? I think the simplest for this scenario is to do the civic zone. You know, there's the least amount of impact with it, I think, unless we're, you know, to this point, are we thinking about any unintended consequences there? But I think that I would be open to doing the civic zone and working in these other 2 options as language can be created that'll make it easy to enforce. Because I think these are benefits to residents, you know, to be able to do that. And, you know, you can always just hire an excavator to come in and move all the dirt down and get it just right, too.
Build it down.
That's right.
But, I mean, that would be my suggestion is really, if we want to include a civic zone, all that does, I would say, my option with the 1-to-1 ratio on the roof pitch, that would be the thing I would like to see changed, because then that could apply it through the whole city and give some options. If somebody wants to turn their building, the only instance that would say, if you want to exceed that height within that 1-to-1 ratio, would only apply if you're in a civic zone. But then again, we're only bringing, if the first option that I suggest solves this situation, there's really no reason to go down the civic path unless we feel like we want to give that option to other people
That's a good point.
in the future.
That's a really good point.
I like that, the one that solved this problem, and the others would gradually work on as needed.
Well, another point that I think is interesting that you bring up, Eric, with these other two is, I don't know that we want to discourage people building extra buildings on all the big lots that we have. You know, we talk about, you know, housing shortages and things like that. A barn dominium's a real thing. You know, and someone could, it's hard to make it pencil to build a whole building and rent it out to someone. I mean, rents are going up, but that's always gonna be a tricky thing. But if someone can use it as part of a garage or storage or whatever, and then have a little mother-in-law apartment in there, then that pencil's a lot better for someone to get some use. And if we can do it in a way that does protect view shed, which I think we all want, then considering both of these options in language that makes it easy for the city to enforce, it kind of makes sense.
When it just, again, going back to the intent of the ordinance, what I believe the intent is, I can't see any other reason why we're saying, you know, the setback would be any other for anything else. You know, I mean, you could argue, oh, bigger building means you're gonna do something that's louder, so we want it further away, but really 1-to-1. So what you're gonna do in a 15-foot tall building is just as loud as a 10-foot. Sure. So why is it? But, you know, going back to, I think, like the pool ordinance that Scott mentioned, I really think the distance is because of that, is to help with noise and things, but buildings are different, so that would be my suggestions that we would recommend to the city council that as diagrammed in the meeting, the 1-to-1 ratio
And that's,
above the 10 feet
and to be clear,
on the,
is that your red picture
Yeah,
over there?
yeah. And what he sketched on the
And what
notes.
he sketched.
Yeah,
Should we make a motion?
Do we motion or do we table? What was the
it's a
recommendation?
recommendation to city council.
Yeah, I mean, if the
Got
planning
it.
commission feels like one meeting works and you talk through the issue and you're comfortable with forwarding a recommendation to the council, you're welcome to do that in this meeting.
I don't think we need to have him write an ordinance and come back and say, what do you think? I think
Yeah.
this is a simple enough adjustment that it meets the need.
Yeah, I agree.
They could draft it and propose to the city council. Since I'm not leading the meeting, I guess that would be.
So this is your,
Yeah.
this is your
Well,
option, right?
Yeah.
Turn the building, depending
Yeah,
on how
those
building
that
is.
have to be included in our standard.
And you want to retain currently, a 10-foot tall building can be between 3 and 5 feet from the property line.
Yep.
At 5 feet away from the property line, your 10-foot tall is where the 1-to-1 starts. So your max height of a building is 25 feet tall at 20 feet from the property line. And that 20-foot setback came from the council looking at the majority of our rear yard zones in North Ogden is 20 feet, and you can build your house 35 feet tall at that 20-foot setback. So it's a compromise between the height of an accessory building not exceeding a single family home in most cases. So it would be, all other things would be retained. We would just add the provision that if the slope of the roof is less than 1-to-1, the wall height is where you measure the height of the building. for
Yeah,
the
wherever it
setback.
meets that plane is where that
Yeah.
triggers the distance.
We'll figure out how to write that in if that's the direction that PC wants to go.
Do you need any more specificity from us as far as like anything formal? Is that good enough?
I don't think so. I think you could just say, why don't we, I've taken notes and I'm gonna call them options 1, options 2, and option 3.
Okay.
So it's, it sounds like option 2 is the one planning commission wants to go with.
Yeah, that would be my motion.
That's his motion.
We recommend a city council, option 2 would be added to the current ordinance. The current, yeah.
Second?
I'll second it.
All right. And do we vote on this, Scott?
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Green, how you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Barker?
Yes.
Commissioner Watson?
Yes.
All right. Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
I vote yes.
Seems like I vote against your own motion sometimes.
No.
Mace will probably do. that.
Yeah, don't challenge me.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting in the seat to do it.
Yeah.
Does the city council generally accept your recommendation?
Total wild card.
Not a wild card, yeah, it's a wild card.
And city councils and legislative decision-making have broad latitude in that decision. So they are ultimately.
They can adjust it however they would like and then pass it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to come back to us.
Or deny it or remand it to PC. And there's a bunch of things we can do.
And we've seen them all.
So remind people to vote.
Yeah.
For the right person.
All right, so I guess we move on to our public comments, if there's any public comments. Great, all right,
Just one question.
oh yeah,
If you went with the civic,
the microphone, so it can be recorded, yeah.
if you went with the civic zoning, would that negatively impact Buena Vista at all? Or does that?
No, doesn't change that.
Doesn't change anything. They wouldn't have any heartburn with. Okay, I just,
Yeah. Don't want to take off your neighbors.
they've been good to me. I don't wanna, just blame it on you anyway.
No.
Most likely their ground needs to be zoned in civic anyway,
Okay,
because we do have a lot of areas where there's tanks or things buried in the ground that other people don't know about. So it does kind of raise that, oh, hey, this is a civic use,
well,
planned civic
Yep.
use.
Any remarks from planning commissioners? I guess the one remark that I have is, it's nice that the progress on all of these accessory buildings is being made when there's still some memory of the recent things that we've discussed. There's been a lot of work that's gone into this, a lot of work that's gone into it. And I think, I appreciate staff bringing this issue up and encouraging a lengthy discussion on it tonight where we actually have some time to do it. And Commissioner Thomas for kind of thinking it through and bringing forth some specific suggestions. So I think it's great work.
it's true, because I saw accessory buildings again.
But it's all getting better. I think it's giving citizens more options.
Yeah.
And so I think it's great. Any report from Scott, our Community Economic Development Director?
Yeah, so we'll have a presentation from our active transportation consultants on December 6th. We were going to schedule with this meeting, but thought that would, adding another 30 or 45-minute presentation to tonight's agenda would have been really long. So December 6th, come and in addition to anything else that we have on the agenda, just be prepared. We'll hear from the active transportation folks on their existing conditions and their recommendations. And if I can, we'll be forwarding out a mapping. It's called a story map that you scroll through and you can look around and see what the current recommendations are. And it's the first cut recommendations for the bike and pedestrian network in the city.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's great. Thank you. John, any remarks from our city manager / attorney?
Yeah, you got an email on Tuesday that said, please RSVP for holiday dinner. Please respond and please join us.
Cool.
So,
Alright. Anything else?
Well, if you ask so nicely.
yeah. North Pole is again happening this year in December, and the Christmas tree lighting as well was on the 2nd. So if you've got family, kids, grandkids, come participate. There's a lot of fun stuff going on. So
It's great.
Those events were wonderful last year, so, yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, those things make a difference.
They do.
So, all right. That's all. I think we'll adjourn. So thanks everyone. Oh, a motion to
Make a
adjourn.
motion, we adjourn. Oh, I already did a motion.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
I second that.
All right.